This is a tutorial video to help you with the data commentary assignment for LLED200. In this video, we're going to look at the basic components of an academic data commentary, the basic stages. We'll explore a quick example. We'll try some online tools that can help in building a data commentary. We'll briefly talk about some organizational strategies, and we'll cover a few common mistakes at the end that we want to avoid. Some resources that'll be used in this video, we'll be looking at an academic writing page, a word and phrase corpus, OWL for APA style, and also the APA style blog. So let's look at the basic stages of a data commentary. This is an academic data commentary, so not to be confused with other types of data commentaries that you might have seen before for something like IELTS. You have lots of different types of data that you come across in arts and management. You might see data in line graphs. This is a pie chart, histograms, flowcharts. This is a scatter plot. Bar graphs or bar charts are quite common. You might have a different type of infographic. So once you have your data that you're going to comment on, you'll have 3 stages in your data commentary. So stage 1 is called the indicative summary. It points the reader to the data and it summarizes the content. I always try to imagine that my reader can't see the graph or the table, and I'm telling them what that graph does, what it has, what type of information and content is there. You can do this with active voice or passive voice. There's some examples here. Active voice, something like figure 1 shows something something. Or you could do passive voice, and you could do are shown, are given, or as shown in figure 1. Those are all different language choices for the indicative summary. So I'm going to show you an online site that was covered in the PowerPoint slide. So if we go to this academic writing page, this is all about talking about charts and diagrams. There's a lot of examples. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom though, after all of these examples, there are some language choices, language features that are there for you. Here is language referring to the diagram or the chart. So this would be what you would use for your indicative summary. There's lots of choices there. There's also choices here for describing different trends that you might notice in the data, or describing your highlighting statement. So the highlighting statement is stage 2. It highlights the results that are really relevant, interesting, or important. So think about what's the most important, what's the most significant thing in that data that you want to highlight, and just let everything else go. So stage 2 and stage 3 are really interconnected in that you're going to have a highlighting statement, and then for stage 3 you're going to write an extension. So before we get to stage 3, let's look at some choices for stage 2 for a highlighting statement. We've got some verbs and nouns we could use. You might see an increase or a rise, improvement, decrease, fall, decline. Maybe it goes up really quickly, it soars, it escalates. Maybe it plummets, right, or plunges. Sometimes it's interesting to see if something remains steady or remains constant. We've got some different verbs and nouns here. We have plateau, which is nice. We can also modify those. We've got some adverbs and adjectives you might use. Slight, rapid, moderate, strongly, drastic, right? Sharp, gradual, maybe it was marked. You can also see some of these language choices back on our academic writing page here. There's ways to describe changes. These are quite nice, I think, getting you a nice theme started there. So once you've done your highlighting statement, then you're going to move to stage 3, which is the extension. And this is really an extension of stage 2. So you're extending your highlighting. This discusses explanations, implications, problems, recommendations. They might not do all of those, but these are 4 really common things that writers do when they write a data commentary extension. We do want to make sure to hedge appropriately, so these findings may indicate. So we can see some hedging language here. We can use modality to hedge, things like could, may, or might. We can also do it with adjectives and adverbs, things like perhaps or possibly. So let's take a look at an example, a quick example. Here, just wanting to stay really organized, I have my LLED200 folder, and in that folder I have the different writing assignments I've done. So this is my data commentary. I want to make sure to set up a folder for my sources if you're downloading your sources that way. I keep my draft references page, and I started an outline. I went ahead and followed the file format that I'll have to use anyway at the end. So you want to make sure that you're keeping separate files for your outline, for your draft, and for your revisions. I also went ahead and downloaded the assignment instructions just to make sure everything was right in one folder where I could refer back to it and find everything easily. And for my sources, when I downloaded them, I went ahead and put the first author's name. That just makes it easier for me to find the source that I'm looking for. So here in my sources folder, I'm going to look at my chart that I chose. So this is talking about the United States, and this is the proportion of households with handguns. And I can see there's percentage here and there's years here. And so this is data that's been tracked over time. So the first thing that I'll want to do with this data is make sure that I understand exactly what it is that I'm looking at. And that's going to help me write my indicative summary. So I'm going to go back to my LLED200 folder. And then I'm going to try my indicative summary. So looking here, and I need to tell the audience what information, what content is in this graph. So I started with some of my language choices. I could choose active voice or passive voice. So I started with active voice, and I did figure 1 entitled, and I put the title here in italics. Shows the percentage of American homes that owned at least one handgun from 1973 to 2012. I could write it a different way. I could maybe choose to do it in passive voice, and passive voice would then look something like the percentages of American homes that owned at least one handgun from 1973 to 2012 are shown, so that's my passive voice, in figure 1. So again, they're just choices. Active and passive are both fine choices for doing your indicative summary. Now I want to look at what I want to highlight. So there's some really interesting things in this graph. This is a lot of data. This is almost 40 years of data. So as I'm looking, it's always good to see if you can pick out patterns or something that happened that changed. So for me, there's some interesting things here, but I think what I'd like to focus on is there's a relatively stable period here where the proportion is quite low, and then all of a sudden there's this big jump from 20 to over 26%. And so I wonder what caused that big jump, and that happened in 2008. So I'd be interested in researching what happened in 2008 that caused this big jump to happen after this relatively stable plateau here. So I'm going to go back to my outline. So here I have my indicative summary. In the final version, this is all going to be in paragraph form, but right now I just want to make sure that I have all of my stages. So I need a highlighting statement. So here I tried a highlighting statement, and I wrote this percentage because I want to keep in mind that my indicative summary already talked about the percentages of American homes, so I can use this and referring back to percentage for my theme here. It remained relatively constant from 1998 to 2006, ranging from 20 to 21%. So that's describing this right here to my reader. In 2008, the percentage of households owning handguns increased dramatically to just over 26%. So I want to make sure that I'm paraphrasing the data here. So this is just over 26%. And I know I have these language choices to look at. So I'm looking at some language choices and deciding which ones to use. And I decided to do increase dramatically, but I'm not totally sure if that's right or not. So another tool that I could use is a corpus tool. So there's the word and phrase corpus here. And I'm going to put in my increase dramatically, and I want to search it as a phrase. And I search, and I see, okay, increase dramatically. Do those two words appear together commonly in English in academic writing? And what I'll see when I search is yes, these are all examples of increase dramatically, and I can sort what comes before and what comes after, and I can see increase dramatically in is very common, increase dramatically over, and those look like time periods, since, these look like time periods as well. So that gives me a good idea of how that phrase is being used by looking at a corpus. So I think it's okay for me to use this here. Handguns increased dramatically to just over 26%. So this was the first time since 1994 that over 1/4 of United States homes owned non-hunting related guns. This is my highlighting statement. I want to make sure that I am including the in-text citation even in my outline. It's very important to keep track of your sources in your outline. So this is my in-text citation here. As I'm going, one thing to keep me organized is I go back into my LLED folder and I see that I have my draft references here. So my draft reference here, I wanted to go look and see how to do the reference for my graph. So another good resource to use is the Purdue OWL site for APA. And if you look at here, we've got electronic sources, as this came from an electronic source. If I scroll down, I can see that it tells me how to cite data sets and graphic data. So this could include things also like maps. And it's got some good examples here. So I used that to double check my draft references to make sure I did this correctly. So I'm keeping my draft references here, formatting them as I go. So now that I have an outline of my indicative summary and my highlighting statement, I know I have to do the extension. So I'll want a really good nominalized topic sentence for the extension. So I'm going to use some of that causal language. And for my extension, I started with the spike in American household handgun ownership rates. So that's a big noun group there. Nice abstract noun group for a topic sentence. In 2008, could, I'm going to hedge, be due to. And then as I saw, a lot of what people do in extensions might be explanations, they might be implications, they might be problems or recommendations. So I went ahead and started sort of outlining these for myself. Remember that this is research writing, so it does take time to do the research. I've done the research outside of the video, so just to keep the video shorter in length, but that this will take time for you to find your sources. So going to the UBC library as an example, I ended up with my advanced search. I did gun control and I did it in quotation marks so that it'll give me that as a phrase. I don't want gun and control, I want gun control. I looked for Obama because my guess was, based on this, that the 2008 might be due to the election. So I wanted to see if the election had anything to do with this. I put United States, again in quotation marks, so I get it as a phrase. And I put or America because I really would like to get sources with either of these. I go down, I want scholarly materials. I don't want these things. Search. So I look here. I found a good source from the Journal of Public Economics, and this was Fear of Obama. This was a study done related to guns in the 2008 US presidential election. So it's good to start with reading the abstract and the introduction, but I oftentimes feel like a lot of the information that's really useful for me in my writing might be towards the end of the article, might be in the discussion or even the conclusion section. So scrolling down, I found some interesting things here. So I have academic research that does show that there was an increase in demand for guns, and this was partially, so the researcher is hedging, driven by Obama's future gun control policy. So that would help to explain my highlighting statement. And here we have, for instance, a gun policy aimed at reducing the number of guns may actually increase them. So that's an interesting thing that I may want to include in my data commentary. And then down here, I thought that this was sort of a good example, looking specifically at states with large increases in demands for guns. There was a consequence of that those states had 20%. They were 20% more likely to experience a shooting where more, I can start to paraphrase this, where more than 2 people died. So I can go back to my outline here and I start building. And remember, you don't want to build from just one source. You're building your own unique data commentary, which is why you want to use multiple sources. But I can start looking and I say, okay, here in this article, making sure to keep my in-text citations in my outline. This was called the Obama effect, so I put it in quotation marks. There was another explanation from another article that I found about symbolic racism. There was another explanation about political conservativeness and the disapproval of gun control laws that I thought I could use. I was reading and I thought I found some implications that we just saw. Right? The implications might be that laws that try to lessen the number of guns actually may have the opposite effect and they may go up. And we saw problems, an example problem in my source here about the 20% more likely to experience a shooting. I found some recommendations in another article that I found. So here in another article that I found, again, reading the abstract was good, the introduction, but the information that I really wanted was towards the end of the article. It's always good to highlight. You can put notes here in your PDF to help you with your research. So this is the author's recommendation for future research. So I may want to put that into my outline. And remember, this is all just brainstorming and outlining, getting your research in line before you start drafting. So now that I go back and I can see I've started to build my outline. I started with my indicative summary. I had a couple of different choices there for active or passive voice. I did my highlighting statement, what I thought was really important in that data, making sure to cite the data here in my in-text citations. And then starting to build an outline of my extension, looking for a good, strong, nominalized topic sentence, and then seeing if I can find some of these things in different sources to start building my own extension of my highlighting statement. So one thing also to keep in mind is it's good to keep your draft references here. So I want to add this Journal of Public Economics article that I found. And here in the library, you can do cite this item. I'm using APA style. And it'll give you a format preview. So we're going to copy that. I see it starts with a D. I want this to be in alphabetical order. So I'm going to put it here. And then I think what happens is sometimes you just grab it and it's done, but it's not formatted yet. So I have to make sure that I keep the text. I have this here, but it's still not formatted quite right yet. I do want to make sure that if there's any proper names that they're capitalized, so definitely want to capitalize Obama. Here, this looks good. This is the title. Just double checking with the APA style. I wanted to see if I should capitalize them or not. They have a nice blog that gives you some text examples of when to capitalize titles and when not to. So if you're using the title in the writing itself, then you would capitalize all of the content words, but if it's in your reference list, then you don't need to. So reading through here, this looks good. I want to make sure that my journal title is in italics, which it is. And now I still need a hanging indent. So I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to right click and go to paragraph and say I want it hanging as an indent. Okay. And then that will give me that nice hanging indent. Take out any unnecessary spaces. Make sure you always save. And now I keep my draft references here. Okay, so that was a quick example of how to go through and start outlining for your data commentary, making sure to keep yourself really organized in the process. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. You want to make every word count. This is 400 to 600 words. So here are some examples here, packing some things up. So the original was, the reason why more American households may own more handguns is because America has unique gun laws and regulations at the federal level. It's okay, but I think I can pack it up some more, and I can take out this reason why, and I can just start here. American households may own more handguns because of unique federal gun regulations. So that's going to let me pack up more information into my 400 to 600 words. Here, this is a really common one too, starting this theme with there. This is sort of an empty theme. There are many explanations for the spike in handgun ownership in the United States. I could pack that up and say the spike in American handgun ownership rates in 2008 could be due to, and make sure to hedge and put in that causal language. So we want to stay away from empty phrases and phrases specifically about how the data is displayed. So some empty phrases to stay away from, there is or there are, here is, it is. In other words, a look at the line graph shows we don't need that. We also don't want to talk specifically about how the data is presented. So we don't need things like the red line shows that, or the x-axis shows this while the y-axis shows that. So we can talk about the data itself and not how the data is displayed. We want to stay away from some overused phrases. We might call them canned phrases. These are some really popular examples for the most part. Last but not least, therefore, firstly, secondly, thirdly, in summary. So we want to stay away from those and really start to rely more on connecting our theme and our rime. And you don't need to tell the reader what you're doing. For a data commentary, the reader knows what you're doing. So you can just directly do it. You don't want to have things like this paper will, or here is a possible explanation, or it's worth mentioning, or I'll conclude that, or in this data commentary it will mainly focus on. You don't need any of that. And you want to use all of those 400 to 600 words so you can just go straight to your indicative summary, your highlighting statement, and your extension. Just one last thing to keep in mind. You want to make sure that your participants and your processes match up. So if you have something like the graph fluctuated from, the graph isn't fluctuating, right? The graph is showing a fluctuation. So just making sure that the graph shows, what does it show? It shows a fluctuation. Something like the line graph said, Graphs don't talk in that kind of way. So we would want to go back to some words that are really common for doing indicative summaries. And here are some of the words that we commonly use for indicative summaries. We could do show, summarizes, reveals, displays, provides, demonstrates. Maybe it suggests or illustrates, or indicates or presents something. So just making sure that you're using the right process, the right verb for your participant. Okay, so this has been our tutorial video to help you start outlining for your data commentary assignment in LLED 200.